Welcome to the Security Exchange, where real-world security meets real-world experience. Whether you're a security practitioner, general counsel, risk manager, or somewhere in between, we've got you covered. We feature our team of subject matter experts, past clients, and leading voices across the industry to cut through the noise, share contemporary practices, and deliver insights that matter. No hype, no sales pitch. We're proudly vendor agnostic. While we stay sharp on the latest tech and trends, our guidance is grounded in one thing: what actually works. From cyber to physical security, from policy to preparedness, it's all on the table. Let's go. All right, welcome back everyone to the Security Exchange. As always, I'm your humble host, Dan Pascale, and I'm fortunate to serve as the CEO here at COSECURE and manage this podcast. I'm not great as a technical person, you all know that. So before we get started too far into this, if you all would take a minute, find that like and subscribe button. It's probably on the bottom. Maybe it's on the right. Heck, maybe it's on the top. I don't really know. But if you would do that, I'd greatly appreciate it, right? I'm super excited today, as I am in every podcast, to welcome in Don Hough, our Vice President of Public Sector, to talk a little bit about school security, his role here at the firm, but really his path to get here and where we see the future of school safety, right? So without further ado, let's get to that. So, hey, Don, welcome to the pod. And I guess I can say again, welcome to COSECURE. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Dan. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. I'm excited too, as you know, because we've gotten to speak. I recently had to have an emergency tooth extraction. So there may be a few times in this pod here today that people hear some lisping going on. Don't let me diminish from the great work that the Milwaukee Oral Surgery and Implants folks did. Dr. Trigg, you're getting a shout out today on the Security Exchange because I was in tremendous pain and now I'm not. So I'm getting through it. So that's great to hear, Don. It's always great to have you on, and I'm excited to this today as a new member of our team here at COSECURE, someone who comes with what I would say is significant private and public sector experience. How's it feel to be sort of back on this side of the aisle now?
It feels great. I think for me, life's mission, my life's work is all about how do we keep young people safe and support their growth and development. And so the opportunity to do that, whether in public service or private, with other folks that are about that mission and about doing that work the right way, is incredibly rewarding and aligned for me.
That's amazing. And I've known that about you for a long time. But, for some of our listeners who may not know you personally or maybe they've only heard of you, can you give them a little bit of your background, particularly, the last stop with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA or CISA, depending on who you believe, and particularly their School Safety Task Force, or the SSTF, as you might say in government language, right? Including that sort of broad set of responsibilities you had, and you shared also with our friend Lindsay Burton, right? And we could give her a shout out here too, and sort of what the mission of that staff and your team was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see you're going right for the hard questions. Everyone's favorite topic. Tell me about yourself, right? So I'll start with a little bit about me. I'm a native Chicagoan. I'm a diehard Notre Dame fan. I'm a volunteer with multiple youth organizations. Professionally, I joined the team here at COSECURE at the beginning of 2026. Excuse me. But prior to that, I spent the better part of the last decade serving as the Deputy Associate Director for School Safety at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and as one of the managing directors for the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse. My work, I was lucky enough, and I say it that way because I truly mean this in the sense of the public service, to lead our nation's national school safety strategy, working to shape the interagency relationships between DHS, the U.S. Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and Justice. Included in the portfolio of programs that I oversaw included some large multidisciplinary teams, and we really focused on developing and rolling out nationwide resources for the K-12 community and higher education community about what the evidence tells us about what keeps young people safe, what are the best practices. Some of those that listeners may have heard of include schoolsafety.gov, the K-12 School Security Guide, anonymized threat response guidance with the FBI, the DHS Campus Resilience Program, and convening the national summits on K-12 school safety and security, our largest ever national gatherings around K-12 school safety and security. So getting to serve the American public in the federal government, working with some incredibly dedicated and focused humans was special and will always hold a piece for me. I think the part about our work that was so important to me was that we got to integrate physical security, cybersecurity, emergency management for schools and public institutions, thinking about building coalitions with state agencies, school districts, national associations, technology innovators, industry partners, kind of using the role of the federal government in the school safety space to better align where our nation and all the amazing groups that are working on keeping young people safe, getting them aligned or pointed in the same direction. Here at COSECURE, Dan, as you know well, but for our audience, I'm taking on the challenge of leading our public sector practice. COSECURE has long been, to me, the gold standard when it comes to safety and security consulting. And so the opportunity to drive strategic growth across federal, state, local markets and expand our ability, COSECURE's ability to support public institutions in the face of the evolving threats that insecurity and resilience risks that we're facing. I am learning a lot about the amazing team we have here, and on a daily basis collaborate both with folks within our principals here in COSECURE, but also our Coase and O'Connor practice leaders to advance solutions, strengthen client partnerships, and accelerate the impact that we aim to have as an organization.
So that's an amazing background, amazing story of getting here, and so many things you said resonate with me. The first being, right, just talking about relationships and how important that was to you in your previous world, right? And as an end user of so many of the products that were put out by the SSTF, particularly, schoolsafety.gov, those resources, attending those national summits and being part of them, that work was imperative, I believe, to all the folks like us who are consultants, who are helping guide schools and school leaders, really to be a clearinghouse, a place to go. And so we thank you so much for that work and that you did there, and how that ultimately is going to help transition you here into our firm. And of course, you raise a great point as well that I think, without talking much about us today, because that's not what it's about, we're sort of uniquely positioned in being a true national security consulting firm that is a wholly owned subsidiary of an AmLaw 100 law firm, right? With more than 1,000 attorneys and more than 50 different practice areas. We benefit daily from that input and that ability to reach back and really have wide resources. So it's a great point. Well, anyway, that's great, Don. The background is wonderful. I'm going to use that a little bit to frame up what I think is going to be the bulk of our conversation today, really around a recent op-ed that you've written, From Checklists to Capability, right? Because I found it to be fascinating. And as I've mentioned to you, I've known you for 10 years, collaborated with you and worked with you for that long. And I still found that to be a really just an amazing piece. And by the way, for our listeners, the full op-ed is going to be available on the COSECURE website, www.cosecure.com, all one word. It's on our LinkedIn page and will be pushed out. If you're not a subscriber to that to get notifications, you should do that too. I also don't know how to tell you how to do that here, but I'm sure you can figure it out if you're using LinkedIn. And it will also be out on Don's Substack and available, right? So it's really important folks get to see this. So Don, you get right to it in the op-ed saying, schools aren't failing because they don't care or aren't trying. And I absolutely couldn't agree with that more. But as someone who's assessed hundreds of schools and been to them and talked to school leaders, I can tell you they're not exactly sure. So maybe you can give us a little bit today as to why they are. What are the primary contributing factors that you see? So the one I want to talk about first is you go right into reactive security, something that of course drives me mad as a planner and a consultant, right? Is being reactive rather than proactive. But let's talk about why. Are there common factors you have identified, either one, that cause school leaders to be in reactive mode rather than proactive mode? And two, are there factors that can maybe ignite that shift from reactivity to proactivity?
Yeah, that's a thanks, Dan. It brought me a lot of joy that I didn't expect to spend some time with that op-ed. And the reason is because after a decade of leading the federal school safety enterprise, it was one of my outlets to coalesce that thinking and really reflect. And that activity of reflection in summarization was very focusing for me. So you bring up the topic of the reactive mode. And unfortunately, too often, reactive mode, when we're talking about schools and school leaders, is the result of a tragedy, a high profile that happens either in your area, your district, and sometimes at your school. And having worked with communities across the country that have experienced tragedy, I understand that so many community stakeholders in the aftermath have an intense focus on safety. Legislators are making more funds available. Schools are under tremendous pressure and rushing to implement solutions. Where the challenge comes, in my mind, is that in reactive mode, we don't have the benefit of a clear assessment of what is that school or district's unique risks, needs, what's the long-term care plan. We add cameras, we upgrade access control, we schedule training. Each of these things is really important and can be useful. But too often, what I've seen and would break my heart is that they happen in isolation, that we're just grabbing this thing off the shelf. It's not lost on me that when a tragedy happens, when an incident happens in a community, stress, uncertainty, fear is going up. As school administrators, you're hearing from parents, students, community members, teachers, your staff, and they're questioning, what are we doing? You're bombarded as a school administrator, and often the answer to that bombardment is visible security, or that security activities have to go up. The challenge with this, I think, is that the incentives in this case, the incentives for smart, consistent, systemized safety are overtaken by incentives for action, sometimes any action. And over the past few years, there's been, outside of sort of these tragedies, there's been another major driver, I think, in schools of reactive security. And it has to do with the spread of mis and disinformation, such as rumors of potential violence. And these things spread like wildfire on social media, hoax threats and swatting incidents. And clearly not as consequential as a tragedy event, that threat pattern of driving reactive decision-making, of the stress, uncertainty, anxiety of your community members, the call to do something, anything, this misinformation or rumor spread, wildfire, is also something that's driving a lot of reactive safety and security decision-making for school leaders.
Yeah, that's Don, amazing stuff. And I wrote down while you were talking here and thought to myself, a lot of what you're talking about is a little bit of the reactionary that we're used to, right? When there's a significant incident and a call for the community to take action. But it does, in my case, I've noticed a lot of times it leads to the phenomena that we call security theater, right? Those measures that we put in place because they're overt, because we think the community needs to see them to heal. And sometimes there's some factualness to this, right? But often we know security theater is just a bad trade-off. It's bad policy, bad security, or bad dollar spend, right? Not leading to enhancing security. Do you think that some of this reactive mode leads to security theater, and how might some of these administrators avoid that pitfall? I think you might have alluded to it in the first part there, but maybe you can elaborate on it.
Yeah, security theater is a really interesting term that I feel like is apt, but might need to be pulled apart a bit these days. And so what we mean by that, right, is taking security action that can be performative as opposed to effective, or at least prioritize the overtness of it versus the impact of it. And so my instinct is that labeling what K-12 schools are doing as security theaters probably too harsh, that they're not setting out to make security decisions that just look good. However, we have definitely seen cases where that is the outcome. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of school districts across the country, large, small, urban, rural, well-resourced, under-resourced. And something that I've found that they all have in common is a set of committed educators to the best interest of the students, to protecting their students and staff, and that they're almost all, even in the best resourced environments, juggling limited time, funding, and expertise. And so it makes getting school safety right, quote unquote, right, in an environment that was never intended to operate like a hardened facility, right? Our schools are intended to be developmental and welcoming institutions. It makes that getting it right incredibly hard. And so whether it's reactive mode that we talked about earlier, that prioritizes individual fixes and immediate action, that can really come at the expense of a cohesive system where the good intentions of taking action fall short, and it's easy to call those things security theater. The second part you talked about there is like, how do we move from this idea of reactive to proactivity? And so the universal lesson that stands out to me is that schools that it's the same idea. Schools that treat safety as a cohesive system of aligned, coordinated efforts rather than a set or a collection of individual fixes, those are the organizations that are getting on the proactive side. Those are the schools that are doing that are making the difference in the meaningful work and outcomes of proactivity. Safety is people, it's policy, it's training, it's technology. It's not any one of those things, and it's not over-indexing into one of those areas. It's all of those pieces. And the reality is that school administrators are on the daily expected to make complex decisions without the expertise of a security organization about the safety and security of their school. And factors like new threats that emerge that just guidance can't keep up with drive sort of a whack-a-mole approach. Oh, we have to deal with this, we have to deal with that. Instead, schools that are spending time building and improving their safety system, and I don't mean a system like a big conveyor belt that's in the Ford plant. I mean a system of what you already have, your threat assessment, your training, your staff empowerment, your ability for young people to share concerns about themselves and others. These are the elements, the pieces of your security system. And having that system in place is pretty much the only way to be ahead of the curve, because the threat environment is certainly going to outpace and reinvent itself faster than our reactive or whack-a-mole approach to things can. And so that's been the divide. It's not a have and have-nots, but it's a system or a proactive versus a individual fix reactive. That's the divide right now that I see in safety for schools.
I really like, the way you frame that up and really put some brackets around security theater, right? And a little bit about how it's contextualized in the K-12 space. Because I think we know, at least from the colleagues that we have and the circles that we run in, what some of those things are. And I am not saying this, I'm going to bring up the topic. Sometimes we talk a little bit about the use of school resource officers in the same vein. But what we've seen is some administrations to some degree, having a school resource officer being able to fund that position and sort of taking a little bit of a step back from the overall school security posture, because they've kind of gone under this, well, we have a police officer here, he is in uniform, they're out in front every day, they know everyone. Thankfully, school security is handled, but I'm thinking that might be a little bit of an oversimplification, and just curious if, some of what you've seen, the research you've done has also said that, we've gotten into almost a little bit of a, legal term here, detrimental reliance on the SRO as opposed to continuing to do all of those other elements.
Right. It's true. When it comes to safety and security, there's not one fix that's a light switch, a magic light bulb goes on. It's not like that. In having a strong relationship with law enforcement, having SROs in your school can be a very important and effective tactic if it's needed in your context and the boundaries around it are drawn correctly. But just by virtue of having that doesn't eliminate or transfer the responsibility for safety and security. And so how I would tell you to think about this is a lot like your retirement savings. My wife and I are in the process of buying a home. And so we've been thinking a lot about
Good
how
luck with that.
Yeah, a lot about how our investments are set up, right? And when we think about our savings or our investments, it's like, don't have all your eggs in one basket, right? You want to have your resources spread in a couple places that build upon each other, and some designed for good growth, some designed for a bull market or a bear market. It's the same thing when you think about your school safety and security strategy. You can't have all your eggs in one basket, or, Dan, to use the term used, have that detrimental reliance. I think specific to the engagement of SROs in your school, sometimes you have to, something I've seen that school leaders have to keep in mind is a school administrator often will see a situation one way, which is, this is developmental or a student discipline challenge. But an SRO in your school, or let me reframe that, a law enforcement member in your school can see that as a law enforcement activity. And so you have to, if you're going to have SROs in your school, other than just having a diversification, no, you can't have an over-reliance on it. There's three things that I would tell every school to do. The first is you got to engage your community. Even if you as the school administrator know this is the right choice, time and time again, the research would tell us that it is so important to be transparent and explain to your community what the agreement is with local law enforcement, and to, if not sort of solicit their buy-in, certainly solicit their awareness. The second thing would be that you can't just have any law enforcement member. You can't pick the beat cop up off the street and dump them in your 7th grade Blue Hall. They have to be trained to work with young people and work with that population. Organizations like NASRA, the National Association of School Resource Officers, offer exceptional courses and professional development in this area that's specially trained for this population. Really matters. Now, the third piece is you have to have a well-defined MOU, an agreement up front with that law enforcement entity, with that SRO, to say, these are the things that are in bounds, right? These are your duties, and these are the things that are the school's duties, right? The absence of that, we've seen a lot of schools get in trouble where an SRO is now administering school student discipline. Well, that's not the role of the SRO, right? There is a role of student discipline, but that needs to come from the school community, from the administrators. And so these are some of the practices. I think, that tactic, tactic, if you will, of having an SRO is likely important in many cases, but it has to be framed. It has to meet your need. And it can't be the only tool in your toolbox, right? You have to have a diversified investment strategy.
Yeah, I, I won't go back to the home purchasing side of it because that would be too complex for us to talk about. Putting it into school safety might actually be easier, right? Having that diversified understanding approach, understanding what the ecosystem really looks like of school safety, and then saying I'm not going to have a all in, or as you know in the Jim Collins world, I'm not going to fire cannonballs first, right? Because I can't put all of my resources into one thing at a time.
That's
I
right.
think that's a great answer. And really, what's great is in your op-ed, you go on really to start talking about physical cybersecurity and
Mm.
preparedness and how they're often treated as separate domains, right? And of course, we see that all the time. And then conversely, the invert of that, we see in some of our more resource constrained districts, we see they all live under one roof or one person, Bob, right? Just Bob, who's the art instructor and happens to be a volunteer EMT in his personal life. And so we say, well, this looks like a great fit. You're going to lead our safety and security efforts. And so Don, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why both of those scenarios are, I don't want to say dangerous per se, but they're certainly not the right course of action. Understanding they may be or feel necessary to some of our administrators because of those constraints, but how might some of our school leaders, even dealing with fiscal realities that are challenging, take a different approach?
Yeah. So I know so many schools who have a Bob, and thank you to all the Bobs out there. You're needed,
Thank you, Bob.
right? Yeah, but you're put in a situation that's really, really difficult that you may not have the capacity or the ability for, and you're doing your best. And look, I would always tell us that we should do something and not nothing. But the reason I chose to talk about the intersectionality and the convergence of physical, cyber, and preparedness is because there was a time not that long ago where when you talk to folks that had a security background, I'm a physical guy or I'm a cyber person, or
Mm-hmm.
the truth is the days of that are gone, right? The days of physical security, cybersecurity, and preparedness being treated as separate domains is over. Cybersecurity lives with IT. Physical security lives with facilities. Emergency planning lives in a binder. That can't be our world anymore because the real world threats don't respect those artificial boundaries that we've created. Disruptions in schools and in our public sector entities move across systems quickly, and our defenses have to have that same capability. So what do we do about it, right? How do we take the best part about Bob but face the reality of an evolved environment of interconnectivity? The first thing I would tell a school to do, or the first question I would ask when they come to me and would talk to me about these type of things, is I'd say, tell me about your risk assessment. Everything stems from your assessment. Do you have a good understanding of in your school's unique risks and your capabilities? What are you great at, right? There's 130,000 K-12 schools across our country. And while there's certainly some universal best practices, very few of those schools are constructed the same way, live within the same social and jurisdictional context, have the same resources. And so the uniqueness of schools, each one has to be understood. And then the plan for what in the safety world we're going to invest in, first, second, third, short term, medium term, and long term, comes from that assessment. This is not a groundbreaking security expert take, right? This is the same stuff that we all do with our household budgets. And we prioritize. What do we need first? Okay, we need shelter, food, power, right? And then, we can move on to things that are more in the vacation category as our budget allows. And so too often we don't see it in that sort of common sense way. And I understand it's like these topics can be really complicated, but your assessment of what needs to be done to deliver your educational mission and the safety risks and capabilities that you have go from there. And I'll tell you, I tell a lot of schools, like, yes, the assessment is important. And yes, you're going to come out of that with improved safety plans. And we're going to help you figure out how to prioritize your investments. But the process of developing and of doing an assessment can be just as rich and valuable, because that process is going to allow you to engage stakeholders from across your school community, hear their perspectives. Maybe those things aren't aligned. Maybe we think we all well understood this policy or procedure or how this technology is being used. But in that assessment process, it comes out that, hey, these things are, there's a disconnect here. And so if you're familiar, when I do assessments and when we work with schools, I often will think about the Pareto principle, or it's often called the 80-20 principle, right? That there's 20% of things that make 80% of the difference, and then there's 80% of things that make 20% difference, right? When we're talking about the immediate stuff, right, we're talking about what's the 20% of effort that I can put in that gives me the majority of my solution, and then build from there. If you as a school administrator, your ultimate goal, right, is this developmental environment, the educational mission, the welfare of our young people, but safety is foundational to that. You want to start as high on that journey path as you can, right? And so really smart investment. It's not get rid of Bob. It's let's figure out where's our unique need, what's the high value here, what's our 80-20, and let's invest there. And if we root things in that, not only will it help us optimize how Bob is doing his activities, but it'll also help us train the rest of the team, empower them, and prioritize what's next on that journey, right? So this part of it is an area that the idea of convergence, it's kind of hard to see. We can all see when a door's broken. We can all see when a plan fails, but cyber's harder to see, right? Until our technology doesn't work. And so convergence and the ability to plan for that, it's not optional anymore. And it wasn't so long ago that it might have been in the school system. So this, again, is a demand signal for us that systems over individual solutions are critical to dealing with this. Because if we just map the convergence line over the past 5 years compared to where it's going, we should expect that it's going to be in a radically different place 3-5 years from now. And so having a system that can adapt and address that versus an individual solution that can become obsolete is really where schools need to be positioned, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just want to pull back real quick to one point you made in particular, because while you made great points, there was one that really sank with me because I've talked about it extensively, and that is I've conducted hundreds of school security assessments, but so often when I'm in the process of doing that, whether that is either with a board level, whether it is just the leadership of the school, sometimes it might even get out to a parent level, I often learn during the course of that, it is the first time these conversations have happened, right? So getting back to your idea of engaging our stakeholders, making sure that they understand the situation, they build ownership about the process and buy into what the school security program is, why you're doing things, why you're investing, how you're determining your priorities, right? Based on criticality and your cost factors and what's going to move is so important. I don't want to say it's disheartening, so I don't want people to be discouraged by it. But in 2025, 2026 now, when I go out into the field, if I'm sitting with the leadership team and you haven't had these conversations about how we're going to control access to the space, how we're going to do our training, our annual training for threat assessment this year, no one knows what we're talking about yet, then we are far behind and we need to be evaluating how we do that, right? So again, not a discouragement. Don't want people to feel like, wow, we're not doing the right thing, because I know folks are trying really hard, but I think that's one of the great points you make is that you have to have these conversations. We tell people to do that. We have to have them ourselves. So I really love that approach. Well, saying that, we are in 2026, Don, right? Are there reasons for folks to be optimistic about the state of school security and opportunities that we can improve? Because and how that might happen? Because frankly, let's face it, and we're just being honest with our listeners here, and they're seeing the same things we're seeing. If you turn on the television, you probably don't have a lot of reason to feel optimistic about many things, right? But we generally don't hear about the great things happening in our school systems right now. We don't hear about the great achievements that are happening in our school systems. What we usually hear about is the bad thing that happened. We had an act of violence occur. We had a teacher who was, involved in inappropriate conduct, right? And we get that story because that one sells. Are there reasons for our listeners and our school leaders to be optimistic about school security and what's moving forward? And how can we start spreading that?
Dan, I unequivocally say yes, absolutely. Sure. Every day we can look out in the news media and there are challenges, and our challenge environment in the school space is getting more complicated year over year, no doubt. However, there is so much reason to be optimistic because the conversation, the know-how, and the advancement of the community in this space has come a long way. You're exactly right. Across the country, I have seen over the past few years, schools and districts shift away from the conversation of, do we have that thing? Should we have that thing? To questions that sound much more like, do our things work together? Does it reflect our unique risks or needs? This step in what I'm hearing the zeitgeist of the K-12 conversation gives me hope. And I think that is the space that we want to build from as a nation around safety. And I'm going to keep us focused there because I think that's critically important. It's not about individual things, but or a compliance mindset of, for a long time in safety, it was, hey, I need to get to this because my city or state requires me to do X, right? To much more of a capability mindset that reflects that evolving threat environment that says, okay, do we have are we in an athletic position and able to move left and right, up and down a little bit to move as we need to this environment. And so that part is where I see a lot of shiny light.
Well, let's hope you're right. I, for one, am on board with you. I believe there is a lot to be optimistic about. I believe there's a lot that can be done and continues to be done. And that when we only hear one side of the story, particularly with whatever news outlet you happen to watch, where you scroll, what you look at, of course we develop that mindset. But having worked on the inside and having worked in this field a long time, I know that there is lots to be enthusiastic about and lots to be looking forward to. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And on that note, probably one of the things I think, and you addressed this in the op-ed, which is really neat too, is that our school leaders often hear the fancy buzzwords that are out there, right? Things, and frankly, I use them too, right? We're consultants. Anyone who's listening now who's a consultant, you use these words, so don't say you don't, right? We hear things like school leaders say your integration, unification, your systems have to work together, have to speak to one another. You're not getting good force multiplication. You're not getting the right ROI, right? We have the language there, but the practical know-how to do that within a single school or a district is not always easy. And to your earlier point about, well, who does what? Are we siloed? Are we working across the spectrum of physical and cyber and preparedness levels? I would ask you, how are school leaders supposed to consider, integrating the right people into the solution problem? And who are those people in the school, generally speaking?
Sure. So first, let's acknowledge that school safety is not the responsibility of any single individual role or organization within our schools. School leaders, school administrators set the direction, but they can't do this work alone. Community partners, public safety agencies, technology partners, educators, staff, parents, students all play a role in the safety mix. And when these groups operate in isolation, gaps form, right? But when they become aligned, that's where that safety system, again, people, policy, training, and technology all comes together to be more durable and more effective. And so I sort of think when you ask the question of like, who are the right people, I think of this a bit like if you could think of like an archery target, right, that has concentric rings going out. And so the bullseye, or the closest in folks that are in your target, are those that you work with in your school on a day-to-day basis, right? School safety directors, school counselors, facility staff, SROs, front office workers, or the people that are greeting your students, parents, and family members, your teachers, your custodians, your coaches, and fellow students. These are the folks that have the most sweat equity, if you will, into the importance of that school day and the operation of your school being safe. And they each have a role to play. And so as leaders, something that we can do is help train them to understand this is what you're responsible for, right? And this is what you're empowered to do, right? We need you as part of this mix. I called out a few roles that might have surprised you there, right? So I called out facility staff and custodians. It's like, well, what's their role in safety? Sure, okay, we got to make sure the doors are locked and the keys are organized and those sort of things. But, you know, who's walking around your halls for 10 hours a day? It's your custodians. My time in schools, the things that end up in trash or the conversations they overhear, right? It's not to be a spy in the school, but it is to have the awareness of what is concerning and what's not, and then be empowered to report it, right? Another group I mentioned in there is students, right? And so you want to talk about who has a pulse on what's going on and what the feeling is among our most important population, our young people. It's the fellow students, and there are many students that are committed and want to be at the front of the safety line. Now, we're not going to go ask a student to go write our emergency plan. That's not appropriate, right? But there are roles. You see these safety clubs, you see these campaigns that happen in schools that student leaders take on, and it's that ownership. And so part of the exercise when you start to think about the who and start with that inner circle is the folks that are in your building on a day-to-day basis. What is their job? Do they understand that? Are they trained for it? And are they empowered to do something? Their job as it relates to the safety picture. As you move out in the target, then that next ring are who I think of as our community members, right? Our vendor partners and organizations that maybe you have a contract or an MOU with. So these are organizations that provide additional mental health capacity services, right? Fire, EMS, local law enforcement, nonprofit organizations, civic associations that use your space, technology vendors, cybersecurity response folks. Something that I think is important about these is, well, many of them are either partners of yours or vendors to you. Your success and their success are linked, and they have an imperative to be a good partner to you. And so while a partnership can be one way, here's our money, here's your service, it also can be a lot more than that. And schools I've worked with have thought strategically. Okay, right? It isn't just when I dial 911 that the fire department's coming, right? But hey, is there an opportunity to plug them into other activities that are happening around the school and build that relationship, that two-way street that then pays dividends down the road, right? I was at a graduation last fall, and the high school, right? Who'd they have out there in addition to local police, in addition to their security staff? They had the local law enforcement explorer post out there helping with some of the perimeter pieces. And so there are these organizations that can be catalyzed, that care, and that. And then that next ring out, I think these are the folks that are grant makers, state school safety centers, universities, and experts that are helping define what evidence-based practices really align to the school and keep young people safe. A really good example of this that I would point to is that the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center recently put out a great piece of guidance with the PBIS Center about how to think about your behavioral threat assessment system and your multi-tier system of support, your MTSS and BTAM. And we think of these things as separate, but the truth is they're both intervention systems about getting and rallying support and intervention to young people that are having trouble. They fit in different parts of that pipeline, but the purpose of them and the folks you're engaging with them have a ton of overlap. And so, one, the BTAM piece is probably more security generated or historically, and the MTSS is more educator. That Secret Service NTEC guidance talks about actually these systems are pretty overlapped. And in so many cases, when we talk about security systems, we see those points of integration. And so I don't expect our school leaders, our school administrators to be excellent experts in security, but they do convene. They do see these points and maintain our relationships and set the conditions for success. And so that's where I think they can put the biggest finger on the scale, is understanding the who, what their role is, providing training where appropriate, and certainly empowerment to do something to act on their role in the safety mix for a school.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big believer in the who, right? Finding the right who. I would just go say we're gonna wash that government out of you. You went on a little bit of an alphabet soup there for our listeners.
Yeah,
so our listeners might be thinking right here, BTAM, NTSSB, right? Don't worry about writing those down, folks. Don can tell you exactly who they are. Reach out, give them a call, and say, I think you mentioned me here. But no, I totally understand. I know a lot of those organizations and the good they do. And it's interesting because that ties in, in your op-ed, you mentioned, really this not working in isolation. And I think, if I'm correct, you said, beyond schools, a public safety imperative, which was really letting schools recognize, and I mean, really, you eloquently stated this, they shouldn't operate in isolation because they're part of broader communities. So that's so important. How can school leaders of all types, and we think about urban and suburban and rural schools and small districts and mini schools and large districts, how can school leaders use the community resources to improve their security posture and take advantage of them?
Yeah, it's so important. I spent a lot of time in my role briefing members of Congress, congressional committees, agency leaders, up to the White House to talk about school safety. And the place I would always start is the fundamental understanding that schools are foundational fabric of what makes up America. Schools are in every community across our country. Mm-hmm. Every person can think of that teacher or 2 or 10, hopefully, that had a meaningful relationship or moment with them. Teachers, students are our neighbors. As a nation, we care about the success and safety and prosperity of our young people. It's a universal highest order. And I think, that's a very elevated way to say it. The reason I would always lead briefings from there is because that's the place of universal common ground about the importance of schools. As school leaders, you're sort of heads down making sure it happens all the time. So I wanted to share that, right? And so as we take that a bit further, in many communities across the country, schools are already playing the role of sort of a community hub. School leaders are, whether formally or informally, playing the role of kind of community leaders. And so that authority, whether explicit or affirmed by your role, gives you the power to be about building relationships and being about setting the example. And so questions I would ask school leaders when they think about how do I integrate with the community better, right? It's like, do you have the ability to pick up the phone and call your local food bank, right? For that set of students that are now food insecure, okay? So you can figure out who the food bank is, right? but it's more than that, right? Like as a school administrator, do you know who to call over there? Do you have that relationship baked in advance? If you don't, that's okay. Like they're going to take your call because of who you are and because of the role that schools play in our society. But that two-way street created up front of the give and take with community partners, because schools are so essential, are such a critical piece of our community's fabric, I think is really, really critical. And so that's where I've seen some success there, and why maybe a superpower that school leaders and administrators have, they don't always fully check.
Yeah, I totally agree. And realistically, when we think about schools, I think we reach a certain age and we stop thinking about how important they are to the building and the construction, right, of our future, our children, and what they mean even to the family and working parents, right? Schools are much more than just places of education, right? I'm not taking away what the mission is, but they are what is building our future, and they are in every community. And so we just drive by, many of us, we don't have kids in school anymore. We don't think about it. We're not actively looking at it. Again, our only information is what we see on the news, right? We don't recognize how these things and how these community efforts work together synergistically, whether those are faith-based organizations, your hospitals, your libraries, those community people, they're all the same volunteers.
Dan, that's right. Like I think we focus so much on what it means in schools, but many of the challenges in safety and security that we have in K-12, fragmented planning, disconnected systems, resource constraints, these also exist in many other public sector entities. And the good news is the lessons that we learn in K-12, the lessons that those other organizations learn, they're transferable. Risk-based planning, integrated preparedness, disciplined prioritization of what we're going to do to improve our resilience. These aren't tenets that just make sense for schools and districts. They are about the entire community.
That's 100% right. I mean, when we think back, we see these unfortunate incidents of violence take place in the school, and everyone is focused on that, right? Then we see it happen at a university. We're focused on universities. Then if something happens in a church, suddenly we're looking at church and houses of worship, right? These are your communities. These principles apply across the board. And when you treat them that way as such, and the community is working together, right, on these and solving these problems, which usually starts at the local or at least the city level of government, how we're going to address these threats. It's important, as you mentioned earlier, to spread that a little bit across the board, because if your only public safety response mechanism is basically law enforcement, public law enforcement, and they're great at what they do, that doesn't mean they understand how to lay out physical security measures for a house of worship over here, or do a risk assessment on a new event that took place nationally somewhere. They're not thinking that, right? It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. It's like being tasked to build something, build a chair for me. And you open your toolbox and all you have in it is a hammer. But you need more than just a hammer in your toolbox, right? Anyone who's ever built anything understands the importance of having the right tools and how much easier and sustainable it makes the job.
Yeah, it's so much so. Well, Dahl, we talked about there's reason to be optimistic about the future, particularly around schools and really extending that out into other areas. But it can be really tough to measure, sort of, in a way. Well, how do we know we're being successful? I think back to Sir Robert Peel, who's often credited with saying the true measure of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the visible evidence of police action, right? So, let's take a look at examples of that in school safety and security. And clearly the absence of crime, particularly violent crime that we see that makes the news, now it makes the news largely in the initial outbreak of that incident while it's occurring and unfolding. That's a great thing, right? The absence of that is a great thing. We can measure we're not having these challenges. But determining the why are these things happening is also really important. Is it culture? Is it your preparedness? Is it the policies you have? Is there some luck involved in that? And I guess what I'm really asking, Don, is how do schools and the greater we know that we're doing what we're doing is successful? And part two of that, how do we avoid, and this might be a little bit of a loaded question for you today, how do we avoid the pitfalls of single event reaction and finger pointing, and really going back to a lot of security theater, the sort of inevitable onslaught of must-have solutions? These are often technology-based products, innovative, that school leaders are told they must have. And frankly, if they don't have them, they're putting their students and their staff at risk, and they're going to be negligent, and they're facing these budgets and decisions. Back to your point of cost criticality and risk assessment, they don't know what to do. So I said that a lot there. I'm going to break it into two parts. One is we'll go back to first, how do we know that we're being successful in what we're doing? And then two, how can school leaders avoid falling into that trap of I need to buy the latest, greatest thing?
Yeah. Gosh, I hate to see, we talked about the security theater earlier, about putting in solutions that look good might not be effective. There's also the security, the theater pressure, right? Of you need this or else. And very rarely in this work are we dealing with or else's, right? It's a journey, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So, but to your first question, how will we know if we're being successful? What's that look like? Okay. In 2026 and in 2027, what I would say is that safer schools and stronger public institutions will not be measured or defined by how much technology they've installed. Instead, we'll think about safety and they'll be measured by how well do they understand their risks, how clearly are responsibilities for addressing those risks assigned, how strong is the connection between the individuals, the students, staff, and leadership, and how well people respond when something goes wrong. Those are our measures of success. People, policy, technology, and training. Success looks like a system that works together, plans that are practiced, and leaders who can not only explain what they've done, but instead can also tell you why they've made that decision. The why gets us past the fear, the security fear, the negligence, right? Like, I did this because I made an informed decision. School safety and more broadly, public sector securities, it's not a destination. It's an ongoing commitment, sustained work to our young people and to our communities that requires humility, learning, evolution, and partnership. The work ahead of us isn't about doing more. It's about doing more of what matters most and doing it better. Too often, we get into these binary or linear choices like do this or else, or safety is I'm on this end of it or I'm on this end of it. The truth is that safety journey for schools is much more of a circle or a corkscrew that you just keep working your way up and maturing. It's a never-ending journey. It's not something as a school leader that you are going to be done with at any point, nor should we. I hope that someday these aren't concerns that we have to think about, but that day's not close, right? Our threat environment is going to continue to evolve. I have spent my career focused on the question of how do we make schools safer in a way that actually works? And Dan, you brought up some of the challenges, I think, in the second part of your question there about the inevitable onslaught of quote unquote must-have solutions and technology products. And the truth is, as leaders, much like we do in other parts of our lives, we got to keep focused and we got to ignore the noise. We have to root our decisions in an assessment and a prioritization of what is needed for us. We have to have a diversification of security solutions and not have all of our eggs in one basket, be a systems-based approach that can evolve to the time, place, and manner that we need it to, that is encompassing of people, policy, training, and technology. The mantra here, when I talk about the corkscrew or the circle of say, is is sustainment over sprints, right? A bias for action, that safety is not a destination, but it's the evolution of getting there, right? We all know that none of us got into this. None of our school leaders out there, very few, I've never met one, that went to school because they wanted to keep every kid safe, right? They went to school to educate, to teach, to develop the next generation of Americans. But we have to realize that safety is essential for that learning mission to happen. And that's why our safety journey is so important. So Dan, if I could, I want to share maybe a closing thought that might make sense. I mentioned at the top of today's conversation that I'm a diehard Notre Dame fan. And earlier this month, Hall of Fame coach Lou Holtz passed away in his 80s. And here at my desk, and my desk in schools, my desk in governments, and my desk I have a quote from him that I keep here that I think is really apropos for our school administrators across the country, particularly if they're nervous or overwhelmed by this discussion of safety and security, right? And Coach Holtz said to his players, ability is what you're capable of doing. Motivation is what determines what you do, and attitude determines how well you do it. The crux of that for school administrators' role is safety. You set the conditions and priority in your school and district. You convene and empower your players and staff to take action in the safety space, and you ensure your ultimate goal of delivering a world-class education to young people is possible because you have prioritized that we are going to have a foundation of safety. And so that's something that this month has stood out to me, and a thought that I would share with school leaders across the country.
I really appreciate that, Don. I'm going to see if I can hold you here for just another couple of minutes to throw one other question out that I think is really important for our listeners, particularly if those are school leaders right now, whether they're current school leaders, principals, superintendents, or just teachers, or even our consultants, is that in our space, there are a lot of really smart people, a lot of really great voices. And just as I'm sitting here today thinking, as a school leader, as we're trying to simplify their planning process, I was just jotting down in no particular order. And by the way, all of these folks, I know most of these folks, or certainly know folks from these organizations. This is not a look into the organization, but I could write down in my head, right? Schoolsafety.gov is a place we know that we go for information as a resource where we can find vetted information to a particular level, right? But then I started thinking to myself, well, there's the ASIS school safety standard out there. There's the PASS standards that are out there, right? And we start looking at other organizations like Zero Now, the National Council for School Safety Directors, NABEDA, NTAC. I'm getting a little acronym heavy, as you may have alluded to earlier today, right? You have your local school safety centers, the local police department and public safety folks. You have great groups like Safe and Sound Schools, the I Love You Guys Foundation, Safe Schools for Alex. These are just ones I know everybody from them, right? Who do I listen to, and how do I cut through that of which one is the right one today for me and my group? Or do you not pick one? What would you suggest to our school leaders?
Yeah, I don't think you pick one. And I think the answer is that many of those organizations are experts in their area, but there's the universal tenets of what school safety is about and what we know works from lived experience that any of those organizations you're talking about today emphasize. I talked earlier about that 80-20 principle. I would say you start to discern between those and pick maybe different pathways based on your resources, your context, and your values. When you're in when you're down the line and sort of up the corkscrew of maturity, and you're trying to take what you have to the next level, the truth is that first 80% of what it means to keep our young people safe, of having a strong risk assessment, of understanding your physical plant, of providing mental health supports to young people. These practices are universal, And so then you get into more mature expertise once you've established that.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you saying that. It's something that, you and I and work of the task force in the past have talked about. Lots of great people really trying to do the right thing, the best thing that they can, just to do
no one has
good.
monopoly. Yeah.
That's right. Right. It's just to do good. But it can, again, just like trying to figure out what electronic access system I need or how long do I need to store video, right? How many times should I be doing exercises? There's a lot of voices, and it can be really hard for school administrators to say, wow, these folks sound amazing and they've got a great story and they do great work. I should listen to what they're saying, right? And so I think that's important for our listeners to know.
I think so too, right? And just like if you were buying a car or buying an outfit, an informed consumer, you got to think through it, right? So the organizations you named are highly credible. But what we see is that more and more organizations that of different value are getting into the school safety space. And so as informed consumers, right, school leaders have to think through, well, what are the incentives here? What does this organization get out of this, right? And so I do think that when it comes to sort of a first line, do I listen to everyone? I think places that are highly publicly trusted, you do. And other organizations that come to you, make sure you ask the critical questions about where their incentives are and what they want to get out of this, right? We are here for one mission, which is to keep our young people safe. And organizations that align around evidence-based ways to do it, those are where I put my credibility.
So good. So good. So many great pieces there, Don. Well, listen, thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, your journey, really that's led you here today, and for our listeners to take advantage of. And before we go, I have some housekeeping to do, right? So first, let me give also some thanks to our sponsors. First, Connect Bridge. These are not just another TPA folks. These folks are redefining leave administration through the use of advanced technology and professional leave administrators. So if you're a CHRO, you're a school administrator, you're somebody who's out there, one of our corporate clients right now, check them out at www.connectbridge.com. And to our friends at CoDiscover, really delivering the best tailored e-discovery and information governance to businesses of all sizes. You will not be disappointed with their service and sophistication and professionalism. You can see them at www.codiscover, that's no E, that's CODISCOVR.com. And a rumor has it that their managing member, Nicole Gill, will be making an appearance on the Security Exchange soon. So be sure to let her know you want her to get here soon, and we'll make sure she gets on. I also want to give a shout out to Michael Cruz, our senior security consultant, who serves as our engineer, director, producer, art, creative person, you name it, to make the Security Exchange possible. So you don't see him on camera all the time, but he's here. So thank you, Michael. And thank all of you for listening, watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe for the third time. I don't know where those buttons are, but if you're watching this, you probably can figure it out. Do that. Stay safe. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.